Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Shape the System. I'm your host Vincent Turner, and today we're joined by Lulu Luchaire. I think I've got the surname pronunciation correctly, Lulu?
Perfect. Thank you, Vincent.
Perfect. I love that. And let's dive straight in. Ondalinda, firstly, the word, and then secondly, what is it? And tell me all about it.
So the word comes from two Spanish words, one which is onda, which means wave, and linda, which means beautiful. And the inspiration originally came from a day I was in Cuba, actually, and I was walking along the Malecon, and there were those beautiful waves coming. Mm-hmm. And I thought about the fact that I like the word wave because it means a lot of different things, right? And I feel like the world and the cosmos and the universe is made of all those waves of humans, waves of music, waves of the ocean.
Right.
And it shows that kind of energy as well, and has a peak and it crashes and then it exists again. So it's like the ocean breathing. I like the rhythm of it. So that's where it comes from. And it also obviously has a sound wave into it, when you're planning a music festival, which is, part of what Ondalinda is about. That kind of makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And then what is Ondalinda about? I'm tempted, I think, not to use the word festival, but let's unpack that.
Oh, if we could find actually a word that could describe it, that would be ideal. I have been...
Already, make another one up.
Yeah, I've been myself trying to find the right word for it. It's an experience over 4 days, which happens in Mexico every year, and which gathers about 700 people from everywhere in the world, which is one part that I love, and which has for objective to really celebrate Mexican culture and also give back to the local communities and really create a receptacle or a space where people can really connect in an authentic way.
Right. And you talked about 4 parts to it. I think I just heard then. Let's break that down a bit. There's obviously music at part of this, but what are these other planks or these other pillars, if you like?
So there's one thing that I love is bringing in a lot of different aspects of the Mexican culture, but subtly, right? So we work with a lot of artisans, artists that create big art installation that we have during the evening parties, for example, or during the day on the beach. We create big sand installation or using wood or different materials that are good for or not bad for the environment, that are sustainable. And we co-create around a theme. So every year there's a different theme. And with the local artists and artisans, we co-create different art installation. Then we would have also a pop-up with crafts that come from different regions. So it can go from pottery to clothes to different things like this. So the idea is really to showcase in an interactive, fun way, different sides of the Mexican culture and hopefully give back to local artisans and artists.
In the process. And when we spoke about this before, you talked about this coming from a place of fear and a place of love. I want to talk about that a little bit. Let's start with fear.
I think, for me, one of the big drivers when I was younger, especially, I was very lucky to travel a lot, both personally and for work. I used to work for a big company and I used to travel in a lot of different countries. And I've always loved the feeling of meeting people that talk a different language or even use a different writing and eat different foods and wear different clothes. And I've always been really excited by that richness that we're lucky to have, right? The different cultures. And then I felt the tension in my Western world kind of way of life where I can see globalization has, pros and cons, and the cons would be more that we tend to all suddenly speak the same language or get our coffee to the same place and the
Right.
same brand that exists
Right.
without naming it.
Right.
We all know who I'm talking about.
Of course.
Right. And wearing the same clothes. And there's a part of me that feels like it would be, imagine how sad the world would be if we were just all wearing the same clothes and eating the same food and speaking the same language. I
Right.
think, so that's part of the reason why what I strive to do with Ondalinda is really celebrate and support that richness and that diversity, in this case in Mexico, but this is something that you could apply to a lot of countries.
Yeah, and that's going to be, I think, a critical question here is that I feel with Ondalinda you're building a pattern, and that pattern at the moment is focused on really going, I guess, deep into the culture of Mexico and exposing that to people, right? Or getting people exposed to it in terms of the language or the food or the art or the, even the pottery, and I don't know what blanket you would put that under. How do you think this impacts people? So these people who come from all over the world, 700 people, what I guess mindset do you think they're bringing in, and then how do they leave after that 4 days?
I think there's a couple of things. One is because of the number of people being quite small, and it's over 4 or 5 days. People really have the chance to connect both with each other, the guests, but also with
Mhm.
the huge amount of people that work on the event, which
Right.
is, I think, very important as well, because there's a lot of people, from the local villages or the people that build the art installation. We also have like a fashion pop-up with young Mexican designers or with traditional shamans or people that come from Oaxaca with their clothes or their crafts, and they really get a chance to meet with them and exchange. And that's, I'm just here to create a space where I'm hoping for those connections to happen. And I don't want to, force a program onto anyone there. I think it's very important to me to keep a breathing space for people to
Mm.
enjoy the different aspects of the festival that includes, wellness programming and
Mm.
different kinds of activities, but that people can choose to do or not do at their pace.
Sure, sure. And I think, like one of the sort of big challenges I think that's inherent in this is that there's obviously a group of people in, all globally who are embracing this idea of the value in and almost a cherishing of this diversity and inclusion of that diversity. And so I feel this environment creates a place for them to go and experience that. I guess the larger question I have is, how do you, what role do you see Ondalinda playing in trying to take that beyond the 4 days and beyond that group of people? And, in some respects, how do you reach people who are not potentially with that attitude or haven't, considered it that way?
That's an excellent question, and the one that keeps me up at night, because yeah, because I think that it's very easy to talk to a convinced audience.
Sure.
And a lot of us live in those bubbles, including me.
Right.
I live in
Right.
a bubble where, a lot of my friends and my communities and people that I know and I travel with, we kind of all think the same way. And when you
Mm-hmm.
think about the news that we read or that we watch, the books
Mm-hmm.
that we read, the podcasts that we listen to, the conversations that we have, we're all the time reinforcing a message that we already know and we already care about. But
Right.
we're not really, listening to the other side. And
Right.
I think right now, when I see what's happening in the US, especially, there's a great divide happening.
Right.
And that it's like two different cultures not understanding each other. And I live in California, and people in California, it's easy to just like retract to California and feel safe in your own environment. And you're like, oh, this, whole wild world that we don't know. But actually, this is where we need to make an effort and go to the next step. And as you say, how do we reach outside of our boundaries and outside of our comfort zone? And we face the real problems and we get the message to a wider audience. And what I've always said and what I'm really interested about, which is kind of what I want to work next on, is how do you
Mm.
use the global tech tools that we have,
Right.
which
Right.
are very powerful, right? When you think about all those social media platforms, the
Mm-hmm.
news, the podcast, the ways that we have to reach each other that are broader than they've ever been.
Right.
How do we use these to actually vehicle messages of diversity, of compassion, of learning, of understanding each other's point of views, of reaching, compromise and middle grounds, and of enlightening each other. So I think, this is what I'm really looking at, is how to use technology. I think to answer your question, I think it will go through technology, not only physical reunions.
Through the physical, yeah. And look, and it's interesting because I think there's probably a couple of kind of interesting metaphors here, because there is the way that a lot of the technology works. It works on the basis of showing you stuff you already see, because it presumes, well, if you like that, you'll like more things that are like that. And in a way, they're right. But what they're doing is reinforcing our own patterns and our own kind of hard wiring for things that we like. And this is what makes people rigid and inflexible in their views and not open to challenging those views or challenging the notions, the preconceived notions that they might have. I wonder at the moment whether technology, whilst an opportunity to actually fix the problem, is actually potentially part of the problem in the way it's set up today.
Absolutely. And I really believe that those algorithm, the way it works right now, is problematic for that reason. Because it's, again, it's like between the fact that we're reinforcing our messages with our friends and our group of friends, and then what we're seeing, which is supposed to reflect the world outside and all the different opinions, right? And it's true of a news broadcast, and it's true of your Facebook pages. Where you consume information, you should be able to see a variety of different point of views.
Sure.
And that's not happening, and especially not in social media, where, as you say, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you experience it on your Instagram feed, for example, and you see the ads, and you like buy maybe one pair of shoes one day, and then for the rest of the year, all you see is ads for shoes.
More shoes? Yeah, I think it is problematic. I think there is though, I think, and look, you sort of have to, I sort of think of this, if you have to consider the whole, you have to consider the self, right? So how do you change things at a global level? In any change, it could be the algorithm, but it could also be human behavior or climate change or education. But you then have to think for yourself, what is it that I do that means that I'm not, aligned to the problem that I'm also trying to solve? And I think part of that, for people is often actually going outside of where they talk and where they listen to go and understand differing point of views, even if they don't agree with those point of views. I spend a lot of time reading media outlets whose viewpoint I don't agree with, but I'm trying to understand what I don't understand about what they're saying, if that makes sense.
I studied philosophy for education, for undergrad. And what I loved about it is that that's exactly what it teaches you. It's intellectual curiosity.
Right.
And also having to defend a point of view that's not yours. Right. So you're like, you have to learn about all those different books and all those different philosophers.
Sure.
And when you do a dissertation, you have to show one side of the story and then the other side, and then kind of do a synthesis of, the two, which is a very good exercise, because this is how humans have to interact. Rarely, we all have our own personality, our own education, our own baggages, system of belief. And, life is richer when we're able to have a constructive, compassionate conversation with someone who comes from a different background with a different set of values. That's when it becomes interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we're not able to reach out, and when we're just like stuck into our system of value and beliefs, that's where, things become problematic to an extent that they can become really, actually really bad and very serious. So that's why I think teaching kids, really from a young age, how to understand different concepts and understand the fact that there's not a lot of different system of beliefs, and it's not so much about being right or wrong or sticking to one of the different, like, you can have your own opinion, but other people will have different opinions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a bit about then teaching, and I know at Ondalinda you're running workshops specifically, and some of those are wellness in terms of mindfulness and your own health. But is it extended beyond that to actually, talk about some of these ideas and to get people to consider their own perspective and their own thinking on some of those ideas?
I think it happens a lot naturally because of the environment and because of, the programming and the way it's set up. I have resisted until today of doing something that's really didactic, in the sense that you have like one person, giving a talk about something specific. It happens more during the wellness experiences. For example, we would have a sunset ceremony where maybe a collective of 4 different people would lead the guests into a different meditation and consideration on different aspects of the narrative of the theme of the weekend. So it happens more in that kind of way.
Sure.
But I'm considering having also the option to have people talk about different topics, but more I see it more as sitting under the tree in breakouts, smaller groups, to be able again to create a space where people can feel vulnerable to be themselves and share really how they feel.
Yeah, I mean, so often in this type of endeavor, what you're trying to do is create an opportunity for serendipitous interaction, right? Where you're not setting the task, you're saying it'll happen, it'll organically happen if we put people in a room, and to your point, create enough trust with those people that they can be vulnerable about their perspectives or how they think, and be open to challenging and being challenged.
I think you get a lot more when you put a bit of yourself, and therefore you have to expose, who you are and what matters to you and what you believe in and why you're here and what you want to get out of it and what you want to give. And if everyone feels safe enough to do that, then I've done my job. And I feel like this is the way, interesting conversations happen. Now, you can also learn a lot of things from having brilliant minds, giving a 1-hour lecture. Obviously, it's not one or the other. But in that setting of Ondalinda, I cherish those moments.
Mm-hmm. And just going back to Ondalinda at the moment, there is not using the word festival, but there is the experience, thank you. And there's a foundation aspect of it as well. And that was interesting to me. I haven't fully understood that. Can you explain the foundation? And I think there was like I think membership. Am I using the wrong word? Can you talk about that part as well?
During Ondalinda, what we do is during the event, we, promote the Mexican culture through the people we use, like we work with on the different art installation and even, the workforce. Like we really make sure that the people that work on the Ondalinda experience in general, get a lot out of it, and we can support the local communities, etc.
Sure.
And then outside of that, there's also an option when people register for the event to give a small donation to the Ondalinda Foundation.
Right.
There's 2 different foundations. There's the Careyes Foundation, which is the foundation that's run by the people in the place of Careyes where the event happens in Mexico.
Okay.
And then there's the Ondalinda Foundation, which is under a bigger foundation in 501c3 in Washington, D.C. called the Many Hats Institute. It's a project under that nonprofit. And the idea with the Ondalinda Foundation is to give back to indigenous people in Mexico. So last year, for example, we went to see the Huichol people, which we've worked with and who came to the first Ondalinda that we did in 2016. And they live in a very remote place where it's very high up in the Sierra Madre in the mountain. And so we managed to bring about 600 blankets for the winter, as well as medicine, because there's really nothing there. It's a 13-hour drive from the biggest city, from Guadalajara. So they're very remote. So that's what we do with the foundation. We're also working with another tribe, the Purépecha, that has been working with us for the past 3 years and create those beautiful balloons to support the material that they need to do their art. So that's what we do with the foundation. We support indigenous communities of Mexico.
And then is the component of that, that I think is it seems to be a component of saying I want to be aligned to the values of Ondalinda, and people are joining up for that. What for the people who join that? What are they contributing? What are they getting back? Like what role does that play in the? I mean, because the experience is for 4 days over the period of a year. Is this a mesh that sits around that provides ongoing interaction or ability to be part of something throughout the year? Is that what that is?
We share a lot of content during the year, but now what I'm exploring is whether we could add other events and potentially also in different countries, because the model, is very replicable in other places. So really the idea is to promote and celebrate a country's culture.
Right.
So if we're going to do a festival, have a different have the different components of, food and music and wellness. And not everything is Mexican. Actually, the music is not Mexican for the most part. We have a few
Right.
Mexican DJs that we always invite every year, but we also have a lot of
Sure.
international DJs. But the food is, obviously absolutely local. A lot of the wellness experiences is also like we do a temazcal, which is a very traditional sweat lodge from Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is and then we do an art installation and an art exhibition, sometimes with young Mexican artists. So this is something that we can do in different countries. And I actually have been spending quite a bit of time in India recently with the idea of potentially replicating that model in Rajasthan.
I imagine you could probably do 20 of them in India. There's such a diversity even within India.
Absolutely. And even in Mexico, that's the reason why, I've been wanting to do that for a while, but, Mexico is so rich and there's so much depth to the culture, and it's like an onion and you start peeling the layers and there's more and more and more.
And look, just coming back to that, and I'm interested, like, how would you, like, the motivation to do this? I'm assuming it came from a place of your observation is that there's a massive misunderstanding as to the culture of Mexico, or just a lack of knowledge. Like, what drove you to start this? Like, what was the kernel here for you, just specifically for Ondalinda?
Well, my own ignorance, actually, of, when you're European, I feel like after time you feel like Europe is the center of the world.
Of course.
And that you have like your own culture in general. I mean, I don't know if it's the way, where the education works, or if it's just because the world is so big that it takes, time for to get the chance to explore all the different richness that the world offers. But when I landed in California, that was actually the first time I was close enough to Mexico to go and explore in Mexico. And then I felt at home as soon as I went there. I must have been Mexican in a different life. And I had a very superficial understanding of what Mexico was. And it was really tequila and tacos.
And probably not actual tacos, Mexican tacos.
Exactly.
Like, Tex-Mex or
like burritos, which really doesn't exist in Mexico.
Amazing.
And so I had the chance to go there a few times. And then as I went back to Mexico, I realized, how rich and interesting this culture is, how ancient, and how much there is to learn from their history, but also from the indigenous people of Mexico who are still there, which is fascinating, because in France, that's certainly not the experience that we can have, right? But in Mexico, when I have the chance to go and work with the Huichol people, they've been there way before the Spanish ever arrived. So imagine that it's crazy. They're, they're still there, and they still live with the same traditions. And I think we're at crossroads in the way we human people, the human race, the way we're using the resources of our planet, we're really at crossroads, and we need to make big decisions. We can't, continue to use and abuse our planet, and at some points we'll pay the price. I actually believe that the planet will survive without us, without, too much problem.
I agree.
But we are putting ourselves in a danger of extinction, that's for sure. And also just being miserable and destroying, the beauty and the diversity of our planet and just the resources that we have. Now we are at crossroads, and the people that have been able to manage resources and live in real harmony and balance with nature are indigenous people. And there's a lot of, things to learn, I think, from them, and how to live in our harmony with our resources, and how we can try and be better at that. So I feel very blessed to have that kind of exposure, and hopefully I can share with the world everything that I'm learning and bringing them into that conversation.
There's something interesting in that as well, because to the earlier points we were making about having to hold two conflicting ideas, we tend to think in terms of binaries of, well, the planet needs to be run in some kind of homogenous, highly optimized way, where we all eat and drink and do the same things, and everything's manufactured the same way and the like. And that is where salvation is, in terms of being able to efficiently operate and not destroy ourselves in the process. And it seems counter that we have a whole set of indigenous people, Mexican but otherwise as well, who've managed to live in place and not have that problem to solve in the way that they live, but also their attitude that they have to their surrounding environment. And we think that we have to have one or the other, right? People are like, oh, well, if we want to go and not affect the planet, then we have to live like that, which means giving up our way of life. And I think part of what you're doing here is to help people to understand that we can have both. We can have the diversity of and the understanding and the relationship with the the lived environment and each other that you see in indigenous cultures, and you can also have technology. You can also have these systems where we live in cities and we have mass populations and we can support that. We can do both. Is that part of it here, is to try and make that connection for people?
This is exactly what I believe in. Like, I believe that we need to use the global technologies to support local ecosystems.
Right.
I don't think that the way we're farming, the way we're producing food is sustainable.
Right.
And it all comes back to the soil, because the richness of the soil dictates the richness of the food, which dictates
Right.
the nutrients that you have in your body. So it's,
Right.
the way we interact with the soil and the earth is so important. And I think there's a conscious, awakening happening today, actually, which makes me really happy and positive and optimistic about the future, because there's a lot of people starting to understand that, we need to divert the way we're growing food. And a lot of people are, eager to do their part and to learn more and to try and find systems that can be sustainable. Obviously, that makes sense with the way we are at, and where we are at in our Western world. Like, we can't just go back to living in a complete indigenous way, the way indigenous people would in the Amazon forest. But we can learn from their attitude and their sustainable way of farming and different things like this that we used to know how to do, by the way.
Right.
But and incorporate different techniques.
And it's not even necessarily the just the farming of you use the tomato as an example, but the acceptance of the diversity of a tomato. And that might sound like way too detailed, but ultimately, when you have an amazing meal presented to you, if it's cookie cutter and it's bland, it's boring. It's like when you make music. If you make electronic music and all of the beats fall exactly where the beats are, the music sounds mechanical and boring, and people actually don't like it. They like it when you slightly move the beat forward or behind the beat, so that you actually get the ebb and flow that you would get if you were actually playing the instruments. So I think there's certainly some parallels here. Just in terms of, food is a massive part of it. And I think people, so often when they go to a place, Instagram's proof of this, the photos they take are of, their feet on the beach and of the food that they're eating. So food's critical. The other parts of this, the music and the dance and the creative in terms of the artisan and stuff, are these just more representations of the same, or is there something else going on in this part of the experience when you build that and the reaction that you want from people with respect to that?
I think there's a component which I'm going to call maybe spirituality.
Sure.
And reconnection. This is another thing that we can, experience with spending a bit of time with indigenous people, for example, but also that hopefully we can recreate in a setting like Ondalinda, where people get to pause and connect with each other.
Right.
One of the biggest thing that people suffer from is loneliness. This is actually something that's researched and that we're putting dollars to find ways to help people with, loneliness, with depression, with disconnection. And I think that this is a big thing that people suffer from. And, we just live in a place where we've abandoned our elderly, for example. A lot of time in the way we live very far away from our grandparents, for example, and we don't really take care of them anymore. Or we're disconnected with the rest of our families or our friends or our culture. So it's again that tension between local and global, which, I feel every day of my life. And I think that's why I'm very, intrigued by all these topics, is because I'm the first one who separated completely from my family, went and lived literally on the other side of the planet, and been traveling all over the place.
Gave up your European roots.
For the past 20 years. So, but because I have those...
The irony is beautiful, by the way.
Exactly. It's like I have those two tensions that I have to navigate and live with.
Right.
And therefore, I think about it a lot because I'm experiencing that. I'm very far away, and in a world like today, in the midst of a pandemic, the reality is my parents are 75, and if something
Right.
happens to them, I cannot be with them.
Right.
And these are choices that I've made in my life, and because I I'm a curious person, and I like to go and learn and from other cultures, but I'm also separating myself willingly
Right.
from my family and my the set of values and the comfort zone that I grew up with. So I think I think this is the tension between the two. This is what I'm particularly interested in, whether it's through Ondalinda or my personal life, is how do you find the balance between those two?
Right.
Again, it goes back to global and local.
And I think, your going in position is, we know the balance isn't right. There's a trend towards globalization as the solution for everything. And some of the problems we have today probably need global action and globalization as a result to solve. But we lose something in the process if we think that's the hammer that solves every tool, right? I want to go back a step for you personally. And you just touched on it. You left Europe 20 years ago, I think. Talk us through the backstory of how you arrived to be a European in California, working on a experience/festival to shine a light on the indigenous cultures of Mexicans. Like, that sounds fascinating to me. Let's unpack that a bit.
I think it comes from the romantic me. Originally,
Go on.
That's what happened. Is when I was younger, I was secretly in love with all the Russian novels, especially if they were quite romantic or quite dramatic. And so after,
where did you grow up, by the way?
I grew up between London and Paris.
Okay.
And then when I had my baccalaureate in Paris, I told my parents I wanted to go and live in Russia so I could understand and read Bulgakov and Dostoevsky in Russian.
Right.
So that was the beginning of, my insatiable desire to learn from other cultures and, immerse myself in other cultures, I guess. So I did do that. And I went to St. Petersburg for a year in 97, 98.
Wow.
Which, I was 18 years old. So it was full of different kind of crazy experiences.
Sure. Did you learn Russian?
I did. Я забыла всё, which means I forgot everything.
Except how to say I forgot everything. That's awesome.
Exactly. But I mean that I think ignited my passion for exploration of the world and different topics. And then I studied in Paris. Actually, I studied philosophy and then in finance and business, and went to business school. But then I went back to London and I started working for Apple. And actually, I started in London, and then they offered me a job in Cupertino in San Francisco in California. And that's actually what took me to California. And I had a beautiful, amazing experience working for that company at that time. And
sorry, what year was that, roughly?
It was from 2006 to 2012, more or less, I would say.
I feel like that was the perfect time to be at Apple.
It was the perfect time. Steve Jobs was still alive. It was, for part of it.
iPhone just got launched.
Yeah, I actually, my first corporate phone working for Apple was a Nokia. So imagine that. That was pre-iPhone. Now you know how old I am.
Yeah. Look, we all had the Nokia. It was beautiful. 3310. Couldn't go past
Exactly.
Probably was a 3310. Okay, yeah. So you landed in San Francisco. You're working for Apple.
Yeah, and at the time I was very lucky through my job, actually spend a bit of time in really different remote places, from China to Brazil to Mexico. And I spent 4 months in Japan, which was a secret dream of mine, because I've always been fascinated with Japan for the same reason that I'm fascinated with Russia or Mexico, because these are countries that have, very specific, different, powerful cultures.
Sure.
Like when you think of Japan, you have things that come up to your mind that are very Japanese and that are nothing else, right? And it's true of Mexico, it's true of Russia. So, I definitely feel very grateful for those experiences.
Mm-hmm. And then that took you back down to LA, presumably because you were in Cupertino, just in Silicon Valley.
Yes, I was in San Francisco for a while, and then I actually moved back to London for a couple of years, and then I missed California so much that
Pretty sure they wrote a song about it, but yeah.
yeah, that I moved to Mexico actually
Right.
in Baja California for a few months while I figure out my next I started a company
Mhm.
in health and wellness with a friend.
Right.
We started a company in plant medicine because having lived in California, I suddenly world of plant medicine and traditional Chinese medicine and healthy products open to me,
Mhm.
which I was really not familiar with. So I did a quick,
Right.
degree in nutrition, and I got to learn a lot about traditional, medicines, which is, very fascinating actually.
Mm.
And
And usually rooted in indigenous culture as well, right?
exactly, absolutely. And
Mm.
yeah, so I started a company where we did fortified beverages using different,
Right.
elements from traditional Chinese medicine.
So sorry, fortified as in alcoholic? Is that what that?
No, it means that it has
Oh,
supplements in it.
fortified with those things. Okay, cool.
Hmm.
I'm thinking fortified wine. I'm like, oh, that's a massive sidestep, but sure.
Hmm.
So that got you rooted into the indigenous culture generally, but also specifically with Mexico. And then was there an evolution from the wellness product to let's create an experience for people here? How did that change happen?
It's funny how life works. It really
Mm.
wasn't supposed to be a job per se. It became my full-time job, but
Sure.
originally it was more a passion, project. And my idea
Right.
was that I realized that, like me, a lot of people had a very reduced understanding or knowledge of the Mexican culture.
Sure.
Yet when you're in California, you're so close to it, right? It's
Right.
abundant everywhere around you. Um, but you don't know that much about it. And I was like, we need to find a way to create an experience where we can actually all get to learn more about it. And selfishly, I
Right.
wanted to learn more about it. So I was
Scratching
like,
your own head. Perfect. Let's get 700 people from all over the world and something you have to work on for a whole year as a way of learning about that thing. I'm sure there could have been easier ways to do it. I love that you're scratching your own itch in the most wonderful, magnificent way possible.
well, I was very lucky to talk to Filippo Brignone, who's my co-founder and producer of Ondalinda. Actually,
Sure.
we founded the Mexican version of it together,
Right.
and he lives in Careyes in Mexico, which is quite a specific place that doesn't necessarily represent the whole of Mexico, but which is absolutely stunning in
Mm.
on the west coast of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And I we exchange ideas around that project, and that's how it all started. And we gathered some friends originally and
Right.
find ways to work with the Huichol people and showcase their crafts and have some great music. We also brought an art car from Mexico, from Burning Man,
Sure.
called the Mayan Warrior, because my idea was
Oh, I know this one.
always to celebrate Mexican culture in all its diversity. So not only the old traditional indigenous, cultures or the craft, but also the amazing, cool fashion designers that are 25-year-olds today, or
Right.
this amazing group of Mexican people that are behind the Mayan Warrior, which was personally my favorite art car of Burning Man as well. So
Right.
I felt very lucky that they came and joined us the first 2 years, and that was another way to promote the amazing things that are coming out of Mexico today.
Interesting, and that's like as a full circle is that the experience itself has both a nod, or I guess a highlight to the current and the present day, rooted in the past that is ultimately the thing that you're trying to uncover and shine a light on. I think that dichotomy is fascinating. And then you for this you said started as a side project and it sort of became a thing, and I'm guessing it in the first year that you held it, it was sort of like family and friends, direct network, and then started to evolve beyond that. Where does it go from here?
There is so much more to do in Mexico that I have the desire to pursue and continue that event in Mexico,
Sure.
and then potentially bring it to other places like India. I've been, look, I went a couple of times last year to look at potentially doing something in Rajasthan.
Yeah.
And then, as you and I were talking about earlier, it's also how do you bring that message outside of the physical event?
Right.
And obviously, with what's happening today, I am more than ever thinking about what are the different ways to use technology to bring that message to a wider audience and to have an interaction with people even that don't attend the festival, for example, or to a wider audience. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sounds like ultimately you'll take a core idea of how do we get people to embrace and understand and discover different cultures, and specifically indigenous, but I think more broadly anyway. And I think you'll end up building technology to do it, to be honest. I think maybe you'll partner up with someone. But on that technology piece and more broadly, who else out there is exciting you in what they're doing and the problems they're solving related to this, or even more broadly?
So I've been really thinking about content
Right.
lately, because obviously it's at the forefront of our lives in general, but specifically now that, I'm usually on the go, and, I'm a bit of this crazy creative producer running around all the time. And now that I'm in a place where I'm forced to pause and I don't even know if I'm able to, do Ondalinda this year.
Right.
I've been consuming more content. And I think this is an area where we have an immense opportunity to create content where people get to learn really interesting things, right? So using the different platforms to do that, using existing big platforms because they reach a wide audience, right? So the Netflix of this world and the Instagram of these worlds, these are amazing tools when you think about it. It really matters how we use them. It's often with technology is not always the technology that is to blame rather than the way we use it. And I think there's a couple of things that need to happen. One, there is an accountability, and we're seeing tensions right now, right, left, and center in terms of conspiracy theory and the kind of things that you may be exposed to, and how do you navigate what's real and not real. And to be fair, on the tech companies, this is a very complicated problem to solve. But I think more attention needs to be put on that, and definitely somehow respect freedom of speech, but also make sure that the content that people are being exposed to is truth. It's truthworthy.
Yeah, which is a massively challenging one. Given everything you're working on and everything that you experience in the world generally, how, where's your center? How do you sort of stay sane, I guess?
Nature. Nature is my favorite thing in the world. It's my family. It's where I breathe. It's where I reconnect. And, that's why I chose LA as my base. Because this is a place
for the nature in LA.
Well, because it's a place where nearby it's versus, I'm talking obviously where I grew up, right? Versus Paris or London.
Right.
It's a place where I can go and see the ocean in a 20-minute drive, or I can go and walk in the most beautiful nature and really reconnect. And I do that a lot, actually. I am not blasé. I've been here for 6 years and I am not blasé. And I don't think I will ever be. I feel very blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah, you're in a good part of the world, having spent some time there. Lulu, thank you so much. It was really lovely talking to you, and I think I could keep talking to you. There's a whole lot more to uncover, but maybe we'll do that another time. But thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Vincent.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.